Did you catch this? Senator Bernie Sanders will propose today that the federal government should pay to wipe clean all student debt, public, private, all of it, held by 45 million Americans. He said, and this was in a tweet, all Americans will get the college education or job training they need while having all student debt forgiven. We bailed out Wall Street in 2008. It's time to tax Wall Street's greed to help the American people. Joining us now to discuss this, break it down, and whether this is really viable is Rick Newman. Where to begin? What did the simplest
Viability is a great place to begin.
What did the simplest thing in this student loan debt issue just to allow those who are swamped to declare bankruptcy and start over? That's what bankruptcy does.
Yeah, and you're not allowed to do that with student debt the way it stands. Now, that would be a hardship for the banks if you just made it easy for everybody to declare they can't pay back their loans. Remember, you can't just cancel the debt. You have to pay back the debt because in most cases, I mean, these are banks that have made these loans and they're guaranteed by the federal government. But the banks, so you have to pay the money back to the banks. Now, there's around 1.5 trillion or 1.6 trillion in student loan debt outstanding. So the proposal here by Bernie Sanders is to pay all of that back. So that is a $1.6 trillion hit to taxpayers. He says the money will come from this financial transactions tax he wants to impose. So that would be a tax on stock and bond trades. And give it all to people who are carrying this debt. The one key thing here is this only makes sense if you also then make college free for everybody, because you can't forgive student debt for everybody who has it now, but then everybody starts taking on student debt all over again. So this has to be paired with free college for everybody, and it just gets enormously expensive.
And has he done that part yet?
Yeah, that is part of his proposal. And Elizabeth Warren has a similar proposal, but she would not do this for everybody. She would have a cutoff point. So the maximum she would forgive would be $50,000. And again, not forgive. You would actually have to pay that off to the bank, and that would be tested by household income or household.
But what about those of us who paid off our loans? I mean, the average loan right now is $37,000.
You should have graduated later. You should have been born later.
Well, my question is,
you're getting it. Is this unfair? And I think it is, and I think it's not politically viable. But sorry,
I think there's still questions around whether the numbers add up. Right? I mean, that's a big question that's hanging over this proposal, but also the expectation that if these students do not have to pay back their loans or their debt, how much opportunity does that unlock? What kind of growth are we talking about on the other end? And I feel like that calculation hasn't been done yet.
There's no way to answer that question, because what is this? What would the unintended consequences be of having to raise the taxes enough to pay for this benefit? And then how does it change incentives to go to school? I mean, do we? I mean, one unintended consequence, for example, likely if you make college free, if you do that, you increase demand for a college education, which means where's the extra supply going to come from? And if you say, so Elizabeth Warren's plan is free education at public universities, but if you increase demand for that, it's guaranteed to raise tuition at private universities, and probably by a lot, because anytime you create a subsidy that increases demand for something, the price of that thing goes up.
There is a way to gauge the question you're at. The average monthly payment, and I'm just looking at a website that aggregates government data on student debt. It's about $342 a month. Now, I don't know where that money would go into the economy, but that's the argument for forgiveness, is that this money is being kept out of the economy.
Yeah, you can make an argument for first-time homebuyers being ready and willing to form households earlier, right? If you're going to come out and potentially be net $40,000 instead of in the hole or flat rather than be down $40,000, that may help household formation.
Well, at the same time, one of my other questions is, if you are not as motivated when you get out of school to repay your student debt, what kind of jobs might you take instead of the higher paying job, and what kind of unintended consequences would that then have? I
mean, this is a legitimate problem. I mean, there are a lot of young people really saddled with what is essentially too much debt. I mean, it's okay to have student debt. I mean, that is actually considered good debt because of what you're financing. Education is a good thing to finance. But we've done a bad job of sort of estimating return on the dollar for that debt. Yeah. And I think the solution to this problem is something that would do a better job of saying, helping students and their families understand what is the right amount of debt to take out for the right kind of education. And there have been some steps in that regard. But just to forgive everybody's debt completely changes all the incentives about the education system and the way we pay for it.
All right, Rick, thank you.
Thanks, guys.